For so long, it's been part of the landscape of New York City and the mythology of modern America. Yet today, America's lawmen do believe that the mafia, La Cosa Nostra, as it calls itself, is at last on the run.
The FBI has been investigating the American La Cosa Nostra since 1957. And quite frankly, it wasn't until the 1980s that we really started having an effect upon it.
So much evidence has come out about the mob, the way it operates. So many high-ranking mob figures have turned, because the cases are overwhelming, that the structure of the five families is falling apart.
The mafia is on its way to being something that is part of our history rather than something that's part of our future.
It's from FBI headquarters in Washington that the fight against organized crime is being coordinated. And what's made such a difference is that the FBI has gone high-tech on this battlefront, and that the politicians have given them the license to act almost with impunity. Here in the country's most advanced crime laboratories, the scientists have dispensed with traditional painstaking forensic techniques, and instead have adapted devices previously used only by the CIA in intelligence gathering. It means they can hide a bug in an electric socket, transmit sound along a wire the thickness of 3 human hairs, and plant microphones the size of a match head. This kind of sophisticated bugging was crucial to the conviction of John Gotti, the head of America's most powerful crime syndicate, the Gambino family. Throughout his trial, excerpts of FBI surveillance videos showing Gotti conducting business on the street were shown to the jury and broadcast on American television. The audio's not always clear, but prosecutors were able to show how the man condemned himself from his own mouth.
You come this punk, me, John Gotti, you're stepping your you're holding up a bit. Anytime you got a partner, I'm going to be with him.
The government's second key weapon has been the testimony of former mobsters. In Gotti's case, it came from Sammy the Bull Gravano, a former Gotti lieutenant and a multiple murderer. Gravano, who's now being given a new identity, turned government witness. With the fall of John Gotti, New York has lost the capo di tutti capi, the boss of bosses. Despite the undoubted successes of the police and the FBI, the mafia still has a vast network throughout America, with its headquarters here in New York. Some of its operations are in drugs, prostitution and gambling, but much of it lies rooted in perfectly legitimate business. And there the mafia has a network, working round the clock, out on the streets at almost every level. Everyone living here knows that he or she contributes hundreds of dollars a year to the coffers of the mob.
They control the garment industry. They control the construction industry. They control the ports. They control the seafood industry. They control the gambling. They're involved in narcotics.
There's no better example of how the mafia controls perfectly lawful trade than the garment industry. This is a legitimate cutting shop in Manhattan's fashion district. The patterns are cut out here, then transported a few streets away to where they're sewn into finished items. Then they're driven on to warehouses and wholesalers. Finally, they're delivered to the shops. It's a moving chain, and the mafia has controlled it for decades.
In the New York City garment district, organized crime created a cartel that controlled the transportation of those garments. It was thereby able to fix whatever price it deemed appropriate, escalate that price by 10, 30, 40%, rake off millions of dollars every year, merely because in order to produce garments in New York City, you had to produce in Chinatown or in the metropolitan area. You had to use their trucks.
Elliot Spitzer heads the New York District Attorney's labor racketeering unit, and he was the chief attorney in a recent trial of the men charged with running the mafia's garment trucking operation.
What you saw in the garment industry was you saw that and recording in our own sting operation the ways that the organized crime figures controlled the industry. Could we ultimately prove the case to a jury? We brought in a trucker who was not the trucker designated by the cartel, and the reaction was a very quick and swift message from the Gambinos: either use our trucker or somebody will be injured.
To make their case, the FBI captured all this on video.
I'm trying to keep polite and help the man out. But if you keep around, maybe my guys won't do it, but somebody will. Yeah. You know? Truckers will take his part. And we're spending the next 6 months in the hospital. Yeah. Break his legs.
Last month, Tommy and Joe Gambino, the mafiosi who run the garment industry, struck a bargain with federal prosecutors. They agreed to pay a fine, $12 million, sell their trucks and stay out of the industry in return for not going to jail. The mafia's empire then is based on street business. They control the trade that turns the wheels of daily life in the city. So private refuse collection, a service all commercial businesses here have to use by law, is also controlled by the mob. So a presidential commission has reported the cost of building in New York is 20 to 25% higher because of kickbacks and bribes paid to the mafia. All this is possible because of the mob's close links with organized labor, the trade unions. And that's so symptomatic of the way the mob has embedded itself in the system. The biggest current criminal investigation is into newspaper distribution, an area the mob entered in the 1920s. It's no secret that the mafia controls the union here, and in return guarantees the speedy delivery of newspapers vital to every publisher. So it siphons money out of union funds. It controls the union leadership, puts no-show jobs on the payroll, and manipulates health and pension funds. Then there's institutional theft. A couple of newspapers here, a magazine there, small beer individually, but millions over the course of a year. It all adds up to the mafia being part of the fabric, a major player in the way things are done, with tentacles in almost every sector of life. One economic indicator says so much. On every newspaper sold in New York, they say, the mob takes 3 to 4 cents.
The mob has moved away, in a certain sense, from the old-fashioned areas of prostitution, drugs, narcotics, and gambling, and is really manifesting itself through industrial organization. What is illicit and criminal is the structure, and the structure is much more difficult to define, and it's much more difficult to prove that an entire industrial structure is illegal.
This is a new mafia then, and in the 1990s they have new allies, no longer just Sicilian, but almost global. Today Asians run much of America's heroin traffic. Colombians control cocaine. And already there's been an influx of mafia-style groups from Eastern Europe. All the more reason, say the prosecutors here, to crush the American mafia while it's down.
We can destroy the mafia, move them out of those areas of legitimate enterprise where they really corrupt our society, then we've accomplished something. And if we can get on top of these other organizations and stop them from developing into the kind of vast organization the mafia had developed into, then they're easier to deal with.
John Gotti is gone, at least pending appeal. And some in the FBI believe that by the end of the century, the American mafia will be history. Yet Gotti was in many ways a throwback, a Capone figure, famed for his strutting style and flamboyant manner. Not typical of the low-key way the mafia does much of its business today. He is one man, the mob is many, and his conviction was one victory, not the end of the war.
If we are successful in destroying them, it will be the first time that such an organization's been destroyed. And they trace their roots back to 300 years ago in Italy. It's far from over, though.